Public Works Committee. We have one item today, that's the discuss the transportation parking analysis project management and communications plan. So, Bart, you want to?
Sure, so this is a brief history, because we do have limited time here to discuss it, so I'll review as much as we can. This went to the board the previous meeting and was requested to come back to committee for further discussion on the exact makeup of the committee and how those members were selected and what their roles are. So I have a brief memo in front of the proposed plan. Just want to reiterate a few points. So the technical advisory group as drafted was not intended for public engagement. It's rather to be utilized to make sure the project remains within the project scope. So it's kind of a keeping everything online kind of committee. All public engagement efforts would be open to all members of the public. So this is not right forum necessarily in how it's been drafted at least. And then members of the group are intended to represent their respective groups. So if they're being proposed as someone from the bike ped committee, they'd be the person to make sure the bike ped stuff stays on task and within the scope. So that was the intent, that the members are representative of a particular group. With that, there was a question from Trustee Menta whether or not the parking component had groups to cover, or whether or not focus groups could cover that as well. But I have not changed the proposed makeup. I have made some slight modifications to requesting that the board confirm everyone, and so it's recommended by chairs, and then the board would confirm it. But beyond that, I guess we're just here for discussion. And President Rosick wasn't here last time it was discussed either, so she has an opportunity to weigh in. But beyond that, we're here for discussion of the proposed project management plan within the packet, pages 1 and 2. And then you've all met already, but Phil Barron and Andrew Begley from Walker did come out from Chicago today just to offer their perspective of how other communities have done this and whether or not this makes sense.
Well, I was one of the ones that raised some of the question, because the stakeholder, the technical support committees originally were just people to make sure to keep the process on track. And I know at some point, these like the duplex landlords were added and these other folks, and I don't how they get picked, but a lot of landlords are going to have comments on it. This isn't the place, I don't think, for putting comments in. The idea is to have as a really aggressive and extensive public input process than having reps on, and I'm not sure how you pick or select the two people that get on this committee to express those things. So
that was my question. How do we select?
Well, I think it says village president, but for those, he outlined who would be the appointing person.
Yes.
Committee chair gets a few appointments. But my question, did you keep it divided? So I talked with Bart at Planning Commission, and was it still divided into parking is just going to be focus groups, and then, because if it's the same board, I can react to why I think it's more for landlords. So if we keep one advisory committee, or whatever we're calling it, and I kept saying to Bart, can you define it? Because I don't know if it's really technical or if it's really, so to better define that. But it is, if you change parking regulations, one of the big groups of individuals that are impacted are landlords, both small and large. And so when we get, from staff's perspective over the last 3 years, input from people on parking, some landlords want to continue the practice that we have, some landlords do not, and are not participating, and I think that they are going to be the loudest group, meaning for parking changes, because apartments are really, we don't have enough parking for apartments. So that's the only reason I would keep landlords. If you just want one, that's okay too. That's your prerogative, the board's prerogative, but I do really feel strongly that if we're keeping the advisory, or whatever this board is called, as for both, which I see no problem with doing since we're using the same consultant, same process, and they're going to intertwine at some point. The transportation and parking are going to overlap. So I do feel some landlord representation it's a group of constituency that has a stake in this study.
So just a quick answer to that, and then I'll let Phil, so we can use this time wisely. I have them as separate currently still. So I have a parking group and I have a transportation group. If the board wants to combine them, I think that could work.
What would be your recommendation?
I think combining them could work. And we need to ask the question, what is the role of the Technical Advisory Commission committee? and once we need to define that. But what is their role? Is it to keep guardrails up on the project to make sure we stay in balance?
Stay in your scope.
Or are they there to impart opinions on the recommendations, the process, or are we just feeding information to them, and are they keeping us true to the scope that we're not getting out of bounds? And I bring that up only because I'll give you an example. In Holland, Michigan, we had an advisory committee. They were listeners. They wanted weekly updates. We provided them. We had a standard form in which we provided that information to them, so they knew what they were going to get, and they were always equipped to answer to their area of influence, whether it's constituents or their peers that own businesses or like-minded individuals that are in different advocacy groups. They could say, this is where the project is today, this is where they're going, they're exploring these different ideas, but by no means were they shaping the analysis. They were trusting in the process and trusting in the scope that was previously agreed upon and for us to follow that. Now, where the influencers came in from the community, we had focus groups. And those focus groups allow for more participants to be engaged than just getting it. If we had the 12 to 16 individuals on this, the question would be, well, how do we expand that? Who's picked? Who do we pick? And when we had focus groups, we had high density housing.
Sure.
And we had
That's a good
representatives,
idea.
tenants and owners, because they have different views on it. We also had city representatives from all different departments in one meeting. And it was good because they learned from one another that everybody's touching parking somewhere, somehow. And then we had the retail component. There was a University of Hope colleges there, so we wanted to make sure that the student body was heard. So we had a student representative from the local student government there to speak on behalf, because there were a lot of renters. And they...
Now about 52% of us or 58% of us are renters.
There you go. So owner-occupied versus rental units, that's always a big issue, because the owners want to know who has more authority. And when you're shaping policy, the policy impacts everybody.
Can I ask another
Yes.
question? So it sounds exactly right. It guides the contract.
Yep.
It's basically just making sure you're following your contract, you're spending your money, and you can relay back to the public. That's always what I've encountered in planning as well. But I also, just for the boards, isn't it, the people on there are more representatives of organization, like constituent organizations, like the university or
Sure.
the student population, or so that they represent more than themselves, and themselves come in the public input. So I wasn't here to relay that last time, but I do feel that when we ever did it in Milwaukee, you'd say university, I want the university to be our partner, and they would send their representative.
Right.
Otherwise, we're going to get into picking people and on camera, and I think that's really
Yeah.
not a wise
Even if the
decision.
motives are pure, it can be, you can,
All of a sudden
it
it's
can
about people
imply
and not.
that there's a bias. So trying to keep that selection process of the individual as pure is difficult.
Do you have a recommendation on those constituent groups that you would recommend?
Well, if you look at the list that Bart had put together, I think it's a great start, and we can refine that.
Yeah, I'm open to
and
additions, subtractions, anything in between.
correct. Well, definitely you have to have the city staff, and then in addition to that, there's a subgroup that we would be meeting with individually that we already talked about. The individuals that handle administering the parking services on a day-to-day basis. They live it, but the individual lives it, understands it. We want to make sure that our staff gets good understanding on the pros and cons of what they're doing, how they're doing it, where they think there could be improvements made. But also the police department or the group that's involved with enforcement. I know that the PD, it's not the highest and best use of their time. So we want to understand enforcement, frequency, what are the policies, procedures, because that also helps shape the public's opinion. So village would involve village staff, as well as the parking department, or parking, folks that are involved with parking, the university, downtown retailers, so any downtown business association
We have a bid.
group,
Bids and
perfect.
That's it.
Bid representative,
Mhm.
and make sure if there are different locations, you have mentioned 2 streets, that may have different needs, different issues. You wanna make sure that we have representatives from both. So even within if the bid includes, Oakland and Capitol,
Yep.
Includes everybody.
we may wanna think about having a representative from the Oakland area and the Capitol area.
Yeah.
Um,
And there are even, I mean, for what it's worth, I do get a lot of north side of Oakland versus south side of Oakland complaints too, so
I
in,
would,
Cap?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I would stop
Yeah.
school.
But we will have a focus group with that.
and as I
So-
say, that's where I'm coming in, it sounds like these are really good focus groups.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's really sounds.
But having a
Identified
refined
focus
advisory
groups.
committee that's efficient,
Yep.
because we want to
I
focus
think
on
the
what's
bid should have
important,
one.
not what's immediate. And when we focus on what's immediate, when it comes to parking, it's somebody's parking in front of my home, or somebody's blocking my, that's not for this.
Right.
You know, we're focusing on what's important in the long run, long-term sustainable, changes.
Constituents that need to get behind
Is this
it.
the final?
Get
Budget and
recommendations.
finance?
That's
Yeah.
just gonna be-
Started.
Not
Yeah.
yet, but
Soon,
we will
but
be.
yeah,
You can
it's
come
made-
in, you can
yes.
come on in.
Yeah.
Oh, that's all right.
We're talking parking.
So I don't know if Pembroke University was in there,
They did not have a specific UUM.
like that. Anybody else?
I mean, yeah.
So,
I see the connection, but it's hard because they're not in our village. You know?
Yeah, they aren't really.
I mean, I know that there's a lot of students that live.
isn't half the university in our
No.
village?
No.
No?
They
not
ended-
just-
They ended Edgewood,
Okay.
so, that's my only, like, there are a lot of, but I think if we do the tenant landlord,
Well,
That might get to
I
it.
think that would,
absolutely, that'd be great.
and then if we had a focus group, and maybe there's a student focus group, that would get there.
Just
You
as a
might.
pre-warning, I
Right.
don't know if Rebecca shared it with you, but we're trying not to touch the I mean, we can look at it, but the RCA's
Mm.
around the university, so just know that it's there, so that may be
Right,
why we
right.
have a rep.
But, yeah,
But
Okay,
if you even mention that area and you're gonna change something, it's gonna be
opens
a
up
much
to-
longer process.
Okay. Well, for example, we're working with the University of Missouri right now in the city of Columbia. And the University of Missouri student body president shows up to all the meetings. And he presented a proclamation to the committee. And it said, all we're asking is that you consider us financially and functionally in all the policies that you are looking to revisit. If you're making changes that may put an undue burden on us, we want you to consider that, because we want to be good neighbors. We're here temporarily, but we also contribute to the community. We buy groceries, we shop at restaurants. So it was a great,
I agree 100% that the university should have a representative,
Okay.
only because I've never had a study where we didn't include the university, and especially for transportation and parking, because it surrounds it, but it's a huge component for our parking.
I used to sit on, there used to be a UWM neighborhood group, there's neighborhood
Yeah.
associations that surround, and the university with the city had formed this. Now, we weren't part of it, we just came, we said, hey, we're right north of this, we want to participate. But they were really focused on those neighborhood associations, because that's where the really heavy duplex kind
Yeah.
of student housing is. And they came up, and when they do this, I mean, we have the commuter restrictions on our south end. They have like half the spots are students, there's all kinds of different approaches in the different neighborhoods, because it was much more intense.
Sure.
They have parking 24/7, so they're just parked solid
Mhm.
south of us. So that night parking also, and they got a lot of overcrowding south of us
Well,
too.
part of conducting a study like this is making sure we stay disciplined,
Right,
because we can easily get pulled into the neighborhood association,
right.
residential parking permit only, all these discussions that people may want or had or want to change. And if it falls within the jurisdiction of our analysis, then
Right.
we can talk about those.
It
But,
does, and that's where you guys should just
We
decide whether it's in the scope or not.
So we're going to discuss.
Yeah,
it.
residential is within the scope for sure. Matter of how much time it takes up will
Yeah.
be based on their initial, review of what they have and public engagement and whatnot, so that definitely will be discussed.
I think we'll pick it up just in the landlord-tenant focus groups, because we have a lot of tenants and a lot of small landlords and bigger buildings, so you'll pick up that attention for sure.
And I think,
It'd be
going back to
better-
the big process, though, making sure that we have an advisory, a technical advisory group that's lean, efficient, representative. So, if we could say it needs to be thorough, and structured, and that will help guide us in the maintenance of the schedule, maintenance of the scope, progress reports. We will organize the focus group meetings, and that was our vision. We talked about it in the interview. That's what we envisioned. Our vision was to meet with representatives of the retail, restaurant, sector here, residential housing, individual, owner-occupied housing. Meet with the people, because that helps shape then what we put together for the technical advisory committee. And we can say, we met with this group, here are the themes that were mentioned, here are the attendees.
Right.
And there's a good portion of our scope that's dedicated to engagement. And with partners. Pardon?
That's why you were hired.
Yeah.
We need
You
you.
can't organize that's for sure.
Yeah, so that's, just to simplify, there's a guiding committee, commission, we want to define exactly what that is, and then the focus groups. And we feel like if there's 6 to 8 individuals per focus group, some maybe even a little larger, but if they're under that 10, if we have 5 of those, let's just say, I'm just putting a number out there, that already exceeds the number of folks that are engaged, as opposed to just going to one advisory group.
So if there's anybody, this is going to board next time, right, at a committee hopefully, and so if there's anyone else, any group that you think should be on this guiding advisory committee, will you let Bart know
Yes.
before it gets to board?
We'll
And
talk through
then,
it together.
I know this question's gonna come up at board, but who picks the focus group participants?
That's a great question. Typically staff,
Yeah,
their staff identifies who those key voices are. In Appleton, Wisconsin, the Director of Public Works identified individuals that she walked with in the morning and individuals that she was involved with in a neighbors
our
association.
planning director used to
She
do it.
knew who those voices were that would be representative of the group. But it wasn't an application process. Instead, we had a blank form with 10 slots, and we provided them to the director, and we said, can you identify these? We will put together the correspondence that will be emailed out to them. We will notify them where, when, and give them an update and a heads up on the topics that we'll be discussing, so that they can think about it and be prepared for the meetings.
So you have the focus groups just to pick out the top big issues. Then you have the these presentations seem to, I see that where where people come in and you present stuff and let them react and then react to whatever your ideas are,
Correct.
so you can check to see if these focus groups are on track.
Well, absolutely, and if we're doing our job correctly, we're listening to Bart. Bart's going to be our primary contact.
Okay.
We're going to be listening to the community members through focus group meetings. We're going to be listening in the advisory meetings as well. If we share some input that we've received with the advisory committee, and they say, we think you should dig deeper on that, or that may be an anomaly. Though that's the guidance that they're providing to us. The larger meeting presentations, where we've done that before, is we put printouts of the area, markups of some changes that are being considered. We put a lot of pen and paper next to maps around the room for people to engage, write their notes. Do they like this idea? Does an ordinance change seem to be warranted for this subject? And we get a lot of input feedback.
Okay.
It's like anything else. You got to market it. You have to present that this is a chance to come in and listen to a 15, 20-minute presentation on where the planning project
Okay.
stands.
Material that people can react to, especially if they might not have had the opportunity in the focus group.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Right.
Correct.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And, once again, if we've listened to well, and those representatives on the focus group, knew had a good sense of what was going on within their area of influence, we shouldn't be too far off with some of the recommendations. But what we do is we present them as preliminary recommendations. Obviously, it's subject to change.
Right.
In Holland, Michigan, I'll use that again. We gave a presentation, and the hot topic was, should there be meters or no meters downtown? And that was a pretty
you got lots of
emotional.
issues.
Oh, yeah,
Pretty
we're
emotional.
thinking about that as well, yeah.
I mean, a very emotional issue. And we had essentially a station that educated them on meters,
Right. Yeah.
the pros and cons, but then left an open-ended question there for people to fill out and answer, and it was great. That was our most responded to station.
Okay.
And we went through that and we pulled out common themes. And in that case, we also surveyed the community. We did an online survey. That's how important they wanted to try to measure
Sure. Yeah. No. That's
and help shape policy on that decision. Because one of the questions was, would you rather have a punitive system or one that you can choose and pay for your length of stay, or be penalized if you stay longer, beyond the hour or whatever's defined? And do you want control over your length of stay? And some people, it was more of an economic development and community perception that when people come visit, they don't want to have visitors have to pay, and they want to give grace tickets to out-of-town visitors as opposed to official tickets. So it's all about hospitality and perception. They weren't worried about making money, but they were willing to accept the punitive side.
punitive side to the locals.
Yes.
Tax the locals.
Maybe using half a million in
Ticket the
tickets.
locals.
But there were people
That's-
that were
that's
very
a-
vocal. We took meters out, 30 years ago. We never should have.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of topic that we
Okay.
get into
All right.
at those big meetings, and we put a station together. And I know Bart has time constraints.
Well, so I guess where I'm coming from is, I'm hearing there's an openness / desire to maybe just go under one advisory group to cover both topics, and then perhaps to focus that advisory group a little more. But is the committee willing to keep the same kind of recommendation process, where the bid would recommend someone, or Bike and Ped would recommend someone, and then the board, approves that as a full package?
So you're picking the constituent group, the board, rather than the individual person?
Right, that's,
I think that's normal procedure.
and then.
So on the landlord, I'm like the landlord. How would you pick the landlord? I can think of 20 duplex owners that have
Yeah,
different opinions
It's
on
gonna
it.
be the same as the focus groups and asking Rebecca and Bart to pick people to, represent a resident. I've been contacted by, and I definitely asked the board as well for any input, but I have been contacted by probably 2 or 3 smaller duplex, triplex, 5 at the
Okay.
most, over the years, and I'm sure you guys might have, and so
Oh,
those
yeah,
names
lots
would
of
be, at the top of the list. And then a big landlord, I would ask staff, because I've talked with Diane multiple times over 3 years, and she has a couple of the handful of difficult landlords, and I think it would be great to bring one in.
Have them close.
Yep, and so that they will help us implement rather than be a roadblock.
So I think for the focus group, that's gonna be where as staff, both Rebecca and I are gonna have to, pull those ideas from you guys, because you guys
Right.
have the history of those people. We're both obviously newer
Mhm.
to the village. So the focus groups, I feel like, can be those larger groups. The intent for this one is just to make sure that the topic is being covered, right? So,
So on this list, we have landlords, we have 3 open, 3 citizens picked, all that. I mean, if these are to keep the guard, and you're gonna be reporting,
I don't know, yeah.
updating to the board on, you're gonna want input on the focus groups for sure.
Can I ask this? We don't have a neighborhood association, so I've always had trouble with this. We have a business organization, but we don't have a resident organization. So it makes it much more difficult when you talk about residents. So if we had a neighborhood organization, I would just say, have them pick someone to represent them, probably the president would come. We don't. So for residents, as trustee Maher has said, if the will is that we want someone from the neighborhood that's near the university, wouldn't we pick one of those neighborhood associations? to be a resident representative? How do you, like Trustee Mara is saying is, how do you just pick a resident, or maybe they don't belong on the group?
You know, one way of doing it too is looking at the jurisdiction which council members represent, you know.
Well, we all represent everyone,
So it's all at large.
all at large.
Okay, so it may be wise to identify one of those representatives that'd be willing to, you know, be the voice.
Oh, you mean like an elected rep? Well, we do, we have the public works chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but-
That would be,
I mean, you could-
that would be part of the roles and
I'm gonna sit
responsibility
in.
for that member, to, you know, represent the
residents.
voice of the residents.
Okay.
You know, and keep an eye on that
Well, that's, yeah, the chairs.
as an advisory group, but we will have a focus group with residents. too.
Is there any role that the village president should play? Because if there is, we should put it in. I'm not advocating for it or not, I will be at the meetings. I'm just wondering if it needs to go in at all.
Role for residents.
No.
Or for residents.
Yeah.
maybe-
I think potentially, but we're already up to, you know, at least 10 to, we're already at 8. We wanna, if we wanna keep the guardrails, probably keep the numbers
Yeah.
a little,
Right.
And I don't know about 3 residents, so.
That's right.
yeah, and that didn't even include 3 residents.
So it
Eight
becomes a
without,
matter of
there's
the
8
residents.
staff
Let's get a representative
staff
for residents.
on this.
You want one.
this
Yeah, and that
part,
didn't
and
include
I don't know if
everybody
they
on the initial
blended,
list yet, yeah. So that doesn't include 3 citizen members.
And again, maybe it's just one landlord. I mean,
Okay.
I'm good with that, if you guys are good with that.
Sure. I don't know how you pick, I mean,
But the rest of the landlords can come, I mean, it's like the bid, they're gonna have one business owner, that's gonna be on Oakland or Capitol, and one might be a food, and what happens to the retail, it's really hard to pick one to represent an entire group, I get that, but you still have to,
But once again, what are they doing? You know, what is their role? You know, they're being picked to do what? They're being picked to, you know, help keep the guardrails up on this project. They aren't necessarily active in shaping the policy, the recommendations. They're more recipients of information. Whereas the focus group, we're the recipients of information from them. So if that individual wanted to go to a focus group meeting too, we would encourage that. So the individual at the of the multi-unit residential, you know, he's a landlord,
they all should.
lives in the area. He goes to one of the landlord focus group meetings and has his voice heard through that avenue, through that channel.
Can I ask a question about the focus group? So, just knowing some of our history, you know, I'm thinking of some pretty engaged meetings about like Wilson Drive. I mean, we have probably had 300 people at
Yeah.
that meeting, and it was very intense. And then even the last meeting, there was probably over 100 people at that meeting, and so that's my only like thoughts about the focus groups is that they're very narrow, and then can people who are, right, is it open to the public so
I think
that,
they're 2 different things.
you know, somebody could listen to what a focus group says, or are we, I know it would also.
and just
Yeah,
because
we're
like
kinda
in
getting away
Wilson,
from
they
the
broke into
definition of
little
focus group.
Right,
tabletop
So in-
discussions,
In the,
Right,
which
like,
worked a
like
little
that's
bit,
our
so
issue,
like
right.
5 or 6 people got together with a question, and then you had multiple groups
Mhm.
working on
so
it.
just to finalize that, and in the past, for retail study that we had here, you know, some of the other studies, focus groups were limited, they were invitees. I'm sure people can listen, they just can't participate, you know, they're open, I mean, all of our
Right,
meetings are
yeah,
open.
yeah.
But there also was opportunity for like an open house, where you can have, I don't know if you call it a charrette or what you wanna call it, but where there's more and anyone can come.
Potentially that could be our
And that's-
presentations, our over
Okay.
monthly presentations
that's
that
what
would
we're
be
thinking of
open
having
to
it be
comment.
wide-
Cause you
wide
have no
meeting.
idea about this community,
I know.
like, that's
Yeah,
why
Yeah,
you're
you're
hired,
gonna,
because it was
they're really
way
good,
over the
they're
top.
engaged,
Very engaged.
very engaged,
Very engaged.
they're good.
So if
They
you,
really
a
do.
combination of those two, I think nails it.
Yeah, I'll tell you stories. We worked in Palo Alto and talk about engaged.
Probably pretty similar.
Would the TAD be similar? It would be open to the public, but there wouldn't be any public comment for the technical advisory group.
Yeah, there was a request to have everything of those meetings be open.
As
Okay.
long as
To
nobody.
the audience and listen.
Just listen.
Will there be an agenda item, public comment, or
I wouldn't do that, but
Yeah.
I would wait for your open house, and they can always submit to the
I
representative.
feel like we start to blend purposes.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's where the discipline has to come in, and trust in the process, and we want to be very open in the right channels. And we need to do our work. We need to get the information. We need to identify those challenges.
They're guiding the contract. As long as everyone knows what the scope is, it should be pretty easy.
So I think I have enough to
Do you? So
re-wrap this up and talk to Phil over the next week or two, and then present a draft on the 20th. If anyone else has any further comments, I'm happy to take them in.
So where'd we end up on these?
I was gonna narrow it down to one advisory group,
Okay.
merge the two
Okay.
together, and then,
And it's appointed.
yeah, make it more concise on who they are,
Okay.
and just reiterate their role is to guide the process, not necessarily input. The input will come through focus groups and large public engagement meetings.
Engagement rings.
So-
And you'll work that
Yes.
out.
And you know, if you want to put next to, I know the board's very sensitive to this, but if it says Public Works Chair selects, just say with input from the board. Village President selects with input from the board. That'll, I think that, because we shouldn't be doing anything in isolation from the rest.
That's good.
So I'm just trying to think the blending of the transportation with the parking, parking has like been one huge issue in there. Transportation, those blend out good, or
They
the
do.
comment, okay,
There is an interaction.
Okay.
Actually, there's
With
some,
the road.
okay,
they're tangentially related and sometimes directly related.
okay.
Different areas. So what we think is, having, and this is also for efficiency in the meetings.
Okay.
When we have the advisory group together, there'll be a time we talk about the parking, we give an update on the parking analysis, and Steve's gonna speak about the traffic element,
Right.
the transit. and
I
what's
think it'll be
going on.
helpful, the groups will be able to get ideas from each other, it'll spur conversation.
Yeah, because using your term, doing it in isolation, we can build a great parking structure in a cornfield that works extremely well, or a parking solution, sometimes
The tra-
add humans,
Right.
Metro markets.
add cars.
Look what it did to
So
the
if you
traffic.
blend these, there's like, the police chief's on one of them, he isn't on the, so this group will
So-
get bigger just by blending them with.
It may be more thorough by blending them.
Yeah, I
But I think the
The
staff
quality.
isn't really, is the staff really on the technical advisory committee? So you'll have to think about
Or
that, because that's a lot of staff.
Diane,
You have a few.
I mean, it was recommended that staff were part of it, but
It doesn't mean they
I don't know how
a
you guys.
representative from PD maybe.
It's maybe the chief and Diane, but I just, if you start putting the manager and the planning director, it's just gonna be a
She's not
lot.
on.
We never had staff on ours.
Okay. Definitely.
Bart,
individual
Diane,
feedback.
definitely.
Or,
Yeah, someone has to.
PW,
they gotta do.
And I mean, to your point, like, I'll be in contact with you on a
Mhm.
daily, weekly basis, whatever. I don't need to be on the group per se, because I will be
They're all
involved no matter
gonna
what.
be-
So I have no issues with removing staff from the group, because you're gonna be asking us questions anyways.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah,
need for us to bog down,
be an extra seat.
right,
Yeah.
but we'll be there regardless, whether we're on there or
I
not, we're
told
gonna be
you,
there, so.
it's, just keep it going. Yeah, this is gonna be a challenging time to get it moving along. Yeah. Okay.
Even the talking about the transportation advisory group, and we've addressed that. I think we are gonna blend those together. But the focus groups and comments and questions, obtaining information on the transportation side. It's not going to be done separate from parking, in the sense that Andrew and I will be a part of those meetings as well. We need to understand, Steve's our expert on our team, but we need to understand what's going on, just as Steve needs to understand what's going on on our side of the ledger here. So make it all work together.
Last comment before, I know you gotta wrap up the meeting. I spent 3 years internally looking at parking regulations and staff before the past administration left. We had
Okay.
some roundtables. Anyways, you're right with Diane. It may be very helpful, it was very helpful for me to sit with them ahead of the technical advisory committee or whatever this is, and get the rundown. I would love to be there. I have
Okay.
folders that nobody else has. I was given like all the information from the past chief.
Sure.
There's only one binder, so, anyways, I just wanted to share that I have that, and
Okay.
that those individuals really helped. There's certain key staff people.
Mhm. Well, correct. This first phase, which is like the triage phase, trying to find out what is going on and what are the issues, what are the challenges, and what are potential solutions. Sometimes the policy exists, it's just not being enforced or followed. We just need to understand what is, what isn't, and kind of lay that out and educate, the technical advisory group. And so part of our first meeting will be, laying out this kind of a status of the parking system.
This is what we know.
This is what we know. And I think it gets everybody on the same page, and there's an accountability, mutual accountability. Nobody's making up or speaking incorrectly about something. We have the same script.
All right.
Okay, I've got enough to redraft and come back on the 20th, and hopefully we'll get some consensus there from the board.
We'll talk soon.
Adjourn the Community Business Relations Committee, or Public Works, hello, that's it. Trustee Menta isn't here. Yep, that's all right. Okay, adjourned, I guess. Trustee Menta isn't here, we got the Budget and Finance Committee.
Do you want to leave it?
Yeah.
And I have to go in there, I think Sarah's.
Okay, Sarah, who's got the bubble bike, is that you?
No,
No.
I did get,
bicycles.
I did
Thanks, guys. I appreciate
have a
it.
couple questions about public bikes and, sorry.
Rebecca mentioned that Sarah has the ridership.
Oh, she's got the number?
Yeah, because remember they had promised, I called it, they had promised that we would see usage. We had like a dashboard, so I haven't seen it, so I just want to see.
I haven't done that either, but
Thanks.
Rebecca did send out, the original contract with Butler too. But I thought she said, well, now that she was like, we're gonna print it. She did. Yeah, come on in. Just,
Hey, Tonya.
I'll ask.
Yes.
Come on in.
Shall we just
I'm just gonna keep one, I'll do the rest. And I have those other printouts for you, I'll bring them.
thank you. Does that include ridership? No.
No, this is, didn't Sarah look up the rider, someone looked up the ridership? Remember you said.
I have that if you will for the last year, if you were
Yeah,
looking for
yeah.
that, yeah, for 2018 anyway, yeah.
Yep.
Tonya, look at you.
You scooted.
Good afternoon, Tonya.
You know, you look really familiar, and I'm wondering, it's nice to meet you, but were you at the Lake Drive meeting? Did you? Yeah. Oh.
Yes.
I was at your table, Allison.
I know.
I know. Yeah, no, you just, I remember because you had good comments at that meeting.
Of course she did,
Yeah.
yes. Tonya is the secretary of our board, and
Oh,
Bruce, who
wonderful.
is also, Bruce Peace is also, our Shorewood resident, is our chair, and he's a founder.
Yes, I will. Can I just ask a technical question?
Yes.
If it was approved, do we need to modify the contract? Right?
The operating agreement?
Yes, or, yes?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good question. You're the first municipality to ask that question.
So we have, I mean, that was one of my
Yeah.
first questions,
Okay.
is what are we buying and what,
Oh,
what's the
did you pass
usage?
that this time? Yes, okay. I'll let you start.
We do reports to your office and to Bart every month. We do ridership
Okay,
reports
all right.
of your numbers, and so it's just a pretty complicated. It's a snapshot in time, but it shows you the trend. Remembering that you've really been in the Butler family for a year now. Came on in late 2017, really 2018. And the sort of the wisdom in bike share is it takes a municipality about a year to figure it out, to understand what it is, where it is, why it is. Shorewood came to it rather quickly, actually. The usage in Shorewood was surprisingly quick. And I can share with you that there were if it, through the month, through the whole year, about 5,000 trips in and out of Shorewood, which is a lot for your first year and for the size of your population. And then if you're really interested, I'll pass this around. It breaks down even from the stations. You can see the stations.
Do you have enough copies?
I brought 3 because I thought there were 3 on the committee, so I was wrong. I'm
No,
terribly
there
wrong.
are.
There
There are.
Okay.
I'm just extra.
You can be extra.
Do you mind if I also get on the list for the
That's
reports
all right.
too? I know that they go directly to Bart.
They go to Bart.
But if
Mhm.
I
They go to Bart.
I can't get enough
You can
reading.
get this to all the committee members too. They can have their own.
And a
So
trip is one way?
a trip will be to and then from.
These are-
And the thing that we found about Shorewood that we're all excited about is this crazy little graph here. There's all sorts of ways to look at bike share ridership and use, right? I mean, there's every single way you can slice it. So one of them is just the numbers. How many trips did somebody take leaving and coming back, leaving and coming back. This one takes all that data of the trips coming in and leaving, and it maps it out to show use, intent. How were the residents using the bikes? And what you see here is like a classic bike share prism here. We got so excited when we saw it because frankly none of the other communities really have this. You see the wide bands going way across, that's indicative of the number of trips. So a skinny little band is going to show not too many riders, and a wide band is going to show a volume of riders. And notice how the riders are going from places. They're going far. They're using it intentionally to get somewhere and do something. If I were to show you a not intentional, like not classic, I should say, bike share pattern, it would be more like in and out, same station. In and out, same station. In and out, same station. There's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine. But this type of use is kind of exciting. So kudos to Shorewood for using the bikes.
Yeah, can you explain how?
The stations are all around on the circle, and which are probably a little microscopic to read. So these are all your station locations, and then you can take the take the little pink one up here and follow it over. We can see Wilson. The biggest surprise to me was your Wilson and Capitol station. The usage
And where
there.
does that, so that pink starts at Wilson and Capitol,
Yes.
where does it go to?
And it's going to Milwaukee.
And
So-
is it
So that's-
general in Milwaukee or is it specific
Yeah,
to
it's
location?
it's actually it probably is. I just don't know where on this graph. It's
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee.
So it-
Milwaukee.
Yeah, those are
So
Milwaukee.
it's 30% of the Wilson people are connecting to
Milwaukee.
and it's like 8% of the Milwaukee.
And I have to tell you that I don't have to tell you that Wilson and Capitol Station, there was construction going on for the most of the time, and people were climbing over that like berm and to get onto the bikes.
You got the Oakley's right there, so you just jump
Yeah,
on
and
the
they
Oakley.
did. That's exactly what they did.
So this shows Shorewood. I guess I would be interested to know what does that look like compared to Milwaukee.
I can share that with you. I
Okay.
didn't bring it. I didn't bring
Sure.
any Milwaukee
Yeah,
data, but
Yeah.
I can.
because like, it's hard, it's hard to compare, like, this sounds great, but how do I know what that compares to, in a bigger municipality?
Milwaukee will look similar to that.
Okay.
Milwaukee will look similar.
Mhm.
It's just going to have way more trips, number of trips.
But like looking at like 2018,
Mhm.
so obviously in January,
Mhm.
it's low, but like what does January in Milwaukee look like? Is
And if
there
you
a sig-
solve for trips per station, there's a bunch of ways to solve for the equation.
Mhm.
Shorewood's a great performer on all of the benchmarks, so we can give you those benchmarks.
Mhm.
But very consistently, we're seeing some of the highest trips per station or trips per bike, highest bike utilization, highest station utilization compared to other parts of the system. There are some stations, like a Discovery World, knocks it out of the park.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
So there's those isolated,
Right,
so
right.
it gets a little bit hard, there's like so
Yeah.
many ways to slice and dice.
Sure.
But in terms of just an overall,
Mhm.
Shorewood's a rock star.
And I think it speaks to, the community, and it also speaks to you're geographically smaller, so much smaller, so therefore, our system has the highest density in Shorewood. Milwaukee is diffuse. The density in Milwaukee is nowhere close
I
to
think
what's in
the
Shorewood.
metric that would be very helpful is per population. So if you have 5,000 trips and we have 14,000 people, and Milwaukee has how many trips, and they have what's the population, so you would know in the month of January what portion of your
Trips per
populations
capita.
are making trips.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Sure.
think that would be very helpful. So then it brings me to the budgeting question of just, you're asking Milwaukee, Shorewood, all these municipalities to pay the same exact amount, and for each
No.
station,
Yes, per each station.
per station,
Yes.
2,000. And so
Correct.
the subsidy per trip is way higher than in Shorewood if we have less trips. So in other words, it's $3 a trip subsidy.
Mhm. We actually look at it in terms of operating expense, what it costs Bubbler to operate your system, and our whole system. I really hope, and I know we're in Shorewood, and I've been talking with all of the municipalities, but we're kind of like the library system. You know, the books trade and they go beyond boundaries. So I'd like to keep it as a system, but Shorewood costs us, or our net loss in Shorewood is about $21,000 a year.
I
to
understand, well, we can get into that in a second. But the reason I say that is population translates into revenue. And so the city of Milwaukee has a much bigger tax base than the village of Shorewood. And so a lot of our trips are because of the city of Milwaukee. I mean, like you said, it's a system. And because they have such a higher, I mean, the universities in their area, and I'm sure they're a very big population that uses the bikes. I
So
could be
we
wrong,
thought,
so.
so that is a point that you're right about and that we're sensitive to. And so we thought the most fair way to allocate it, so it was equitable, was to do a per station. So
Which makes
Shorewood
sense,
has a lot
although-
fewer stations, so, you know, their share is going to be
Lower.
less.
It's 7, 10, 16,
Right.
55.
It's $3 a subsidy per trip, so I'm just wondering what Milwaukee's paying for subsidy, if you did the numbers.
110,000.
Well, per trip, so how many
Oh,
trips in
for-
Milwaukee?
That's what our ask is from their budget.
And then you divide it by the trips.
By the number of
Yeah.
trips, so we would need to know the number of trips taken in
I think that should just
Milwaukee.
kind of be equal.
Except for when you say the tax base, so I live here, and I used to live on UWM's campus, and I lived on UWM's campus when Bubbler first came on board, and there were 4 stations, and I'm an avid cyclist, and was really excited about Bubbler coming and being right around the corner and providing that option. And the neighborhood that I lived in was very heavily populated by students. And there are a great deal of number of students here. I don't know what the percentage of our population of actual university students altogether is for all universities in. But when you say bigger tax base, there's also a lower earning. So the average earning of what people, in terms of the subsidies that we are also giving away, which is reported in here in terms of people who qualify for food share, people who qualify, do you see what I'm saying?
So, and the thing to keep in mind too, is there's, just as I said earlier, there's different ways to look at ridership. UWM might have high ridership, but guess what, their students pay a fraction. They're paying $20 a year, and you're paying 80. So that,
Who
while
subsidizes?
UWM,
Well, they're
Yeah.
contributing.
So I think the point
Mhm.
is, we don't have the numbers. I think it's a good analytic point of analysis that we should put together.
It'd be
And then I think we should think through, what does that mean in terms of the impact on the community, the impact on the overall mission, the impact on Shorewood?
I mean, our budget's 11 million, right, our
Mhm.
operating budget. I'm sure the city of Milwaukee's is 600 million, I don't know, something really big. So when you're asking for, $14,000, that's a big amount for us in our operating budget.
Right.
Whereas if they had the same amount of stations, you'd be asking the same amount for what they would, that would be nothing.
Yeah, I actually suspect it may end up tipping the other way, which is that if we do, let's say it's $1 per
Yeah.
trip, and we multiply it out, Shorewood may end up having a disproportionately high amount of the subsidy.
Well, we're at $3 a trip, so,
Yeah,
at the moment.
right, so we should do the numbers.
So are you, I'm just concerned about the sustainability of the system.
Fair
I mean, and we were
enough.
from the start, and, I don't see the ridership there myself. I mean, it gets better as the summer comes, and people are out there, and the tourists come, and they're out using it, but, that winter's we've had a long winter. And I'm seeing those stations rusting, and I'm just thinking, how's this system gonna survive? Is it is it really performing
You
up,
gotta shovel it
up
out.
this?
Yeah.
you
Yes,
know,
we do.
I mean,
I mean, what's
do you want me
where's-
to share?
Sure. You can start
So,
at the beginning.
as a chair of the board and as a founder, I have all the same concerns.
That's what we all do.
And they're all valid concerns. So we look at several different measures in terms of sustainability. And part of what brings us here today is just, some fun changes in the fundamentals from when I first was here probably 5 years ago.
Okay.
In terms of the sustainability, there's a combination of earned revenues, which is the ridership revenues, and we think about the percentage that we can of our budget that comes from that. We've been very diligent about driving down the costs, and we have analyticals based on other systems and the cost of operating other systems. We're a very good performer in terms of
Okay.
efficiency, cost, and we get high ranks on delivery of service. So the first thing as a board looking at it, that's the first thing we look at is, are we maintaining service, but are we doing it at the lowest cost possible? Then on the revenue side, we look at the earned revenues and the pricing models. And so we've played around with different pricing models to enhance revenues. One of the hard charges to the organization is to make sure that we're increasing ridership and taking advantage of that.
Okay.
With our ridership model, do you remember the percentage?
Of our budget?
Yeah, earned revenue.
40%. Annual, well, that's annualized. To your point, in the summer months, it can get up to 75 or 80%.
But annualized 40% of our budget from earned revenues of
So
ridership.
what failed, and I don't mean that to sound bad, but when you came to us a year ago, there was no subsidy needed for operating, and let me explain why. And in the memo, it says, no municipality, every municipality, subsidizes operations. And I've read about Seattle and a couple that don't use docking stations, and they actually get money, the municipality gets money back from operations from the bike share. So I don't know that in the memo was absolutely correct, but what changed? Are you not reaching your ridership numbers? Is there more salaries going out the door? What would be, is maintenance cost more?
So if we look back to when we started, our model was built largely off of the Denver model, which was earning revenues and was revenue positive, and without subsidy, and had that's the model that we built off of.
It was a nonprofit model.
Nonprofit
Which
model.
is what you guys are, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And in the interim, in the time since then, there's been some fundamental shifts within the industry, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that model has proven to not be viable. Some of the fundamentals that are different, well, there are a couple of unrealized fundamentals on our part, and there's some fundamentals that have changed. Unrealized fundamentals on our part is we made some assumptions about having a title sponsor. And we've been beating against the Aurora Healthcare, the various entities, United, US Bank, to have title sponsorship. That was a working assumption that we had, and that's a significant negative that we just never realized it. And we welcome any connections to sponsors, and we can go through the list of who we talked about. That's a big one. That's one of the biggest. It took us a little longer to gain traction on the earned revenues that come from essentially advertising on the bikes and on the stations. Sally's done a great job in the last probably 18 months of having some really good hits, and that is a recurring revenue, so that's going to continue to ramp up. So of that 100% equation, 40% from rider, and then some percentage from that sponsorship, some percentage we anticipated from
So
title
you're hitting your
sponsorship.
40% ridership.
Yeah.
Which, by the way,
Revenues,
is
is that correct?
really high.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, when we started, the mid-30s is kind of, a good number for bike share, and for.
And in this market.
I mean, and look at, even for the bus is not even close to that, for an alternative form of transportation, that 40% is pretty darn good. When I first started, we were in the upper 30s, and now just last year we hit 40.
So if I'm understanding, it was basically advertisements that didn't come through.
We like to call them sponsorships.
Right, you know what I mean? But like the private sector not coming through with purchasing a sponsorship.
I think the model was.
Yeah, the advertising and then the title sponsorship, if you want to call that advertising.
I mean, the two unreal,
Yep.
okay.
And then so those are the changes in what we anticipated would happen and was not realized. The changed fundamentals within the industry. We didn't anticipate the venture capital effect. We didn't anticipate the scooter effect. We didn't anticipate the electric assist bike effect.
Well, we did.
So the electric assist bike we sort of saw on the horizon, and we still don't know entirely what that's going to mean. The venture capital effect is an interesting one because if you, I'll combine it with the scooter effect for a moment. If you look at the economics of like a Bird, they're working towards an IPO. They're losing money year over year, and they're funded so that they're willing to do that. And so it's hard to compete against that. Lime bikes is another one. You know, Lime has thrown themselves into both the scooter and the bike business.
The solar bikes also. There's solar bikes in Seattle. Where you
Oh, maybe.
It's kind of like the scooter where you just leave them. There's no dock.
Yes,
yeah, dockless.
yes, absolutely. Yep.
And then the dockless. And from a, this is my personal opinion, but it's a somewhat shared opinion within parts of the industry. I think the long-time winner is we still want docks in the dense urban environment. We don't want bikes and scooters left all over the street. So I think that's a long-term winner. I think electric assist will be a game changer in many regards, both how it gets used and the number of people that use it, and then will drive investment in bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So I think in the long term, we've got a really good horizon, but we want to make sure that we're around in 5 years to realize all of that.
So here's just my comment, and then I'll stop talking. My comment was, it's kind of like, and I know this is personal opinion, but when we were adopting this, I saw this coming. They were already there. You could have I read articles on Seattle, so most of this stuff was on the horizon already. It's kind of like Uber and a taxi company, and how I feel is you're coming to us to ask us to invest in an infrastructure model that we may not believe will be sustainable, and you're not experts at that. But my personal, I look at sometimes the industry, we're becoming investors, and that wasn't the original concept. So you are coming to us and asking us to be investors until your revenue grows. Your earned revenues from bike station was lagged. So as those, for advertisements I think, but if that goes up, then the operating from us would probably need to could be adjusted. My concern is that if we own this, I think there was someone in our memo that, if the municipality owned it or if the regional plan commission owned this infrastructure, I would feel comfortable all municipalities putting in money, including ourselves, in my own opinion. But it's not. It's run by a nonprofit who makes salary. I mean, we pay, you pay your salaries out of your operations, and it doesn't seem like there's anything that the government did different, and it's only been a year. I mean, it was unrealized advertising, basically. So I don't feel comfortable personally voting to invest in an infrastructure that I don't know a lot about. I think it's way worth it. I think that, bike sharing is a great concept. I just don't know that this is what I would pick if I was buying it for the village. So that's my own personal opinion.
But we do own it now. We are partners. I mean, we're partners. So I think we need to,
The infrastructure.
we own the
I
station.
understand.
Yeah.
You guys are required to take it out.
We're the operator, and you do through the, is it TAP grant? TAP grant.
But if the infrastructure fails, are we still on the hook to replace it? No.
Well, there's two pieces to this. With regard to us as the operator and nonprofit, I mean, you can talk about the salaries, but I don't think there's anyone in the organization who is taking their salary at the level that it is for profit-making purposes solely.
Well, no.
There's passion.
That's why we all work for government.
You don't look
here,
like
too.
you don't always volunteers. It's the president they gotta watch out.
The word in the bike industry is that if you want a low-paying job, go to the bike industry. If you want to make a small fortune in the bike industry, start with a large one. Sorry. I am completely respectful of what you said about where to choose to make an investment. If you, How I Built This is a podcast that's very interesting, and the guy who did, I think it was Lyft, talked about he had invested a ton in developing a model that he realized was not the right model, and the best solution was to totally walk away from that and reinvent. So it's, I mean, that's a completely legitimate question and point of view. We can provide lots of points of education and information in terms of why we think this is the winning system, and continue to think that, and not just because we're married to it. And then as a point of the agreement, the village owns the infrastructure.
Do we replace it? Do we maintain it? I thought we didn't.
We agreed to
maintain
maintain it.
Okay.
And at some point, it's sort of contemplated that the infrastructure could be divested from the village. There's probably a 5-year period. I could go into all the reasons it's great, but it's probably a 5-year period. And you have to have it out there for 5 years, and then if you want to divest it, you can. So we could then take it out of the village and relocate it if you wanted to divest it to us. So until then, there is some obligation on the village under the terms of its grant.
I think of the TAP grant is which Bruce is talking about, not our operating agreement, but it's the terms under which the funding.
I remember that.
Exactly, that's it, yeah.
I'll just look over that.
So there's some obligations to that.
But that's going to run pretty quickly, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, you're right about some cities. I will tell you that we were the disruptors, right? Bikeshare was the disruptor, and then some of these new venture capitalist programs came on board, and they're disrupting us, right? They're disrupting us. But if you really, and we have done our homework on all of this. We talked to our sister cities all across the country, as the city of Milwaukee is doing, and we're on the end of that. It started in the coast. It started in the warm weather. It started in the coast. It started in the south, and their learning curve is much farther ahead than ours. And what they've learned is that they still want those dockless bikes to have hubs. They still want, the cities are now, when they permit them, they say you still have to have a place to park those things because they were causing such disruption in the downtown areas. So the concept of having a hub and having a place to put the bikes is starting to happen in all the other communities that are facing this. It's also reliability has come up. As cool as it is to be able to leave your bike wherever you want, you don't know where you're going to get your next bike. So people who are living in that environment are like, wait a minute, I just left that bike outside the coffee shop and I came out and it's gone, and I got to go to my app and I don't know where the bike is, and I got to walk for and hunt. You hunt for a bike, which I've done it. Whereas the reliability of knowing where they are. And so those are the things that we're watching as we navigate through this. I think we're going to be introducing a pilot of some e-assist bikes because we do think that there's value in that.
This is the adapted bikes in the system.
That's a whole nother critter that we're doing.
I was like, wait a minute, is this funding the new adapted bikes?
No,
Not at all.
No, not at all. We got some grant money. And one thing we don't do a good enough job about is toot our own horn. So I'm just going to take 30 seconds. We're the first bike share program in the country to integrate adaptive bikes into our bike share program. It took a year and a half for us to figure this out, and thanks to Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I will tell you the city of Milwaukee bought the bikes that will end up here because people are going to ride them around. And there will be 22 bikes in the system. There will be trikes, hand cycles, and side-by-sides. And they will, we are leading the way.
That's great. Yeah,
in the country. That is just an example of the difference between a venture capital company and your local nonprofit company, because we're part of the fabric of your community. And it's our mission to give back and to be there for you and to be Bubbler for All, which was our mission. But we realized we weren't necessarily Bubbler for All, but we are now. We're going to be. It's going to launch in the middle of June.
And the funders were City Milwaukee and Anthem?
Yeah. And then we just started. We had our first program yesterday. On Sundays we're doing one-on-one sessions with people. I have volunteers from Freighter and the VA, and they're helping people get on bikes who are living with disabilities.
Where would you park them?
They can dock, we figured out how to get them to dock in our system.
That was the magic.
That was the
That's
magic, yeah, once we figured that out.
Huh?
Now we've done that, we've created the sauce, and now we can spread it around to all our sister affiliates if they have the will. You have to have the will to do it.
I just am wondering, so what happens in 2021? Like, what if we need an extra, is this gonna be an every year thing? We need an extra 15 grand year after year, and how do we know that we're not continuously reinvesting?
Or
I
is
mean,
this forever
and-
that level, or?
Yeah,
Right, I mean-
that's a fair question, and in full disclosure, we are talking with Milwaukee, contributed in FY19,
Mhm.
and we are in talks with them right now about FY20 for the same request,
Mhm.
yes.
But I mean, to Allison's point, their budget is just so much larger than our budget.
Right.
And, you know, we, I mean, as residents, do you guys feel that tax burden? And, you know, it's going to go up substantially next year. Yeah, from the referendum, and so, you know, that's what I think about every time we go to spend money, and, you know, $14,000 is nothing to sneeze at in our village. It's definitely a lot of money, and to then ask residents, you know, and all of the numbers are great. You know, I see that they weren't shoveled out all winter. You know, those are the things that make me sort of hesitant and make me concerned and make me also ask, what happens in 2021? And are we looking at this again in 2021? And I mean, I think what you guys are doing is it's a wonderful program, but, you know, how do we, like, we've already funded a lot of this as a community, and how do we make sure we're not coming back every year and asking
Well, in
us
5
for
years,
more and more?
if you're telling us we need to replace all the infrastructure as well, there's just, I need to know.
So I just want to add some clarification. So I just wanted to make sure I had the right section because I've read it before.
Yeah.
But so the village owns the infrastructure, but Bubbler is responsible for the system maintenance. So this includes all costs to repair, replace equipment, whether caused by normal wear and tear, vandalism, or theft.
I didn't think we were responsible at all for anything.
No, that's
beyond-
Bubbler's.
What
That's
page?
Bubblers.
What
Right,
page?
I'd
is
say
it?
beyond
We-
our
She's
initial
on six.
tap
Six.
grant.
Page
Yeah.
6, number 11.
Okay.
So, and also to clarify, within the scope of this agreement, it does allow Bubbler the right to shut down their stations for not more than 4 months of the year.
Mhm.
So, from my understanding, there are some stations here that have stayed open all winter.
Mhm.
And then there are some stations that I'm presuming, because of the comments of not shoveling
Mhm.
out, were
Mhm.
ones that were designated to close.
Mhm. And talking about other municipalities, Tosa and West Alice opted to close.
But what's
So
the
do we
point?
get-
If we don't fund any of it, why would we
They
want to
opted
close?
to close in
For the winter.
total?
Yeah.
They just
Yeah,
for the
they
winter.
take the
Okay,
drought.
I see.
For the winter.
So the municipality
And-
makes that decision?
We did it in concert with them.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Mhm.
okay, I was
So-
like, oh, is that
so-
diminished? I didn't know. Well, there was not.
So Shorewood,
I didn't know. They were supposed to
Well, I
know.
knew about the 4-month break, but I didn't know if I was
So
supposed to be
is that
doing
January, February,
something.
March, and April?
Been here for just over a year.
We
December,
did,
January, February?
it's a ridership. It's
I'm
driven
not
by
looking,
ridership.
I'm just saying it
People
would
in
be,
Shorewood have been
We
using
talked
them anyway.
about- Yeah, okay.
We talked with
it
them.
looks like November.
And it's
But
just
we
good.
did, and we did not close any of our stations.
Right. Now, we may not have always gotten them shoveled out right away.
Yeah.
I also am not sure I want bikes on the
Oh, yeah, I mean.
snowy streets right
No,
away.
I'm not.
Come on.
Sure.
Or at all.
80s.
And just from a resident perspective, just to take off my board hat for just a moment, and as, you know, residents and, you know, listening and being on the pulse of what's happening in the village and with a referendum, is quite involved with that and just the pros and cons of proving that. And I understand what you're saying in terms of increasing the tax burden, but I know for a fact, especially after living in Milwaukee and being a taxpayer for years, that when the tax burden increases and then you take services away, that does provide a sting as well. So I'm not saying that that's the only reason to do it, but it's a consideration of saying, well, you know, coming back to them saying, well, we had to, you know, find money somewhere, and then so this is what we decided to do. And that happens, and I understand, but it's a hard pill to swallow to have an increase in taxes and for people to do this and then have other services taken away, or then start to nickel and dime them for services by charging for services
Mhm.
that were once included in
Sure.
there.
And I 100% agree with that. I do think though, I mean, like, in that regard, that, like, if you're talking about garbage or, things that are very
Right.
basic necessities, I do think that bubbler is, I mean, it's not a
It's not a
necessity.
necessity, but I'm calling it an amenity, it's a service, it's a
It is very
community
nice
service.
to have, definitely. I would say also that I think people are often somewhat surprised by the income level in the village, and
$50,000 for half of our residents.
there are a lot of residents that are struggling to stay in Shorewood, and our property taxes are probably one of the number one reasons why people struggle in Shorewood. And there are a lot of seniors that live in our community and who are making sacrifices, either in maintenance of their home or in other ways to stay in the community. And I think that that's really noble, but I also think is really tough to then then say, but we're going to give, we had to cut some services and we're spending it here. So it's and then not having the knowledge of what's going to happen in 2021 and 2022 is hard to me.
So I would preface by saying that I am truly appreciative because you guys actually think about the budget and finance stuff that you're empowered to and that we're asking you to. And as a resident, I appreciate that. I think I'm going to put a little bit different spin on it, and I'm going to be really blunt, which is the way things are trending, I think that there's going to be some need for ongoing subsidy. I just think that's going to be the case. It's not what we thought when we came in here. We thought we had that revenue model built.
Through advertising. or
Yeah,
sponsors.
yeah. I think that part of the decision that you fundamentally have to make is what are we investing in? And it's not if you look at the trends in transportation and what people are doing, businesses are getting out of the car industry. Car dealerships are looking for alternatives.
Uber.
Yep,
Not
it's
just
moving to
Uber, but
Uber.
sharing.
I have an 18-year-old who still doesn't have a driver's license, and I'm now trying to get him to get one.
We're the ones where my son too.
And every time we start to reduce the number of cars on the roads of Shorewood, we're starting to reduce the cost of those transportation pieces in Shorewood.
Do you mean
So-
road maintenance?
Road maintenance, road expansions. So if you spin forward to what is our transportation profile going to look like in 5 years or 10 years, and what's our parking profile going to look like, there's great articles on this that I'm happy to share with
We're
anyone
in
who
the
wants
middle
to
of a
get
study.
wonky.
That would be great.
But if you
Yeah.
look at
He's talking.
if you look at the parking trends, the people are getting out of the parking business. The real estate dedicated to parking is going to change. When you have self-driving cars and self-parking cars, you no longer have to have parking immediately proximate to the restaurant. So the trends are all saying that we're moving to a changed transportation economy. And if we're moving to a changed transportation economy, what you're not investing in is just a bunch of bikes for people to ride around. You're investing in what that changed transportation economy looks like.
And it will be micromobility. It will be.
Right, the buzzwords are first mile, last mile, and micro-mobility.
I totally agree with that, except we're not expanding any roads. So for communities like in the suburbs, that's a fabulous statistic, because as a planner, it's, you're looking out 20 years and you're seeing, you're not gonna need to expand your roads because we need less cars. But here, we're kind of set.
But we should save on maintenance and have
Maintenance,
And-
yeah.
reduce
So
parking
we need
pressures.
to
I know.
come to some
Yeah.
wrap up
Right.
here on this
Yes.
item. So
Yeah.
what you're looking for 2020 budget, calendar 2020,
Yes.
$14,000.
And you assume that you'll come back to it. I mean, the Milwaukee if you're looking to Milwaukee at 2020, and they said for 2019, whatever it was, for the first year, that
Last
they
year
want
they
everyone
did,
else to pay.
they have asked us to come and have a level playing
Right, I'm
field.
assuming that would be the same request. So knowing that, my other, can I just clarify one thing? So it sounded like, Rebecca, you got under the system maintenance. I always presume we don't replace infrastructure, but I would like to confirm that tonight, because we also didn't do operating and we're getting asked for that. So is there an assumption that after 5 years, that this village would put in more money to the system for infrastructure?
The depreciation would be over. And are you saying you would have the opportunity to divest of the
No,
assets?
No.
No,
The-
it's
how do we-
like a sinking
how do
fund to
you-
replace this
Right,
infrastructure.
'cause we-
I mean, the bike,
The bikes ourselves, it's really more the TAP grant, I think, isn't it?
so
That's the
the
driver there.
bikes, my
Not the-
belief
Not the stuff.
from our budget is that the bikes maintenance, which leads to replacement, is built into sort of the operating piece
Okay,
of it.
the
Correct.
bikes, but the
The
docking.
docking stations have been predicted to have a life of in excess of 10 years.
Wow.
Mhm.
And then what?
I'm hoping that that remains true. I'm a little concerned because I see
The rust is pretty amazing. Get those salters
Please
farther
know we are
back.
on this vendor like you would not believe. Let's not talk about that.
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Uh,
I'm listening.
So,
Yeah.
so I honestly, I think it's unanswered. We would intend to maintain the existing stations and do upkeep on them. We think we can maintain them as they are, and that they'll have a long life.
Yeah.
But what I don't know is if it's all electric bikes, then do we want to invest in stations that have charging built into them?
mhm.
Right.
Yes.
Stuff's gonna
Solar,
change.
Yes.
Right.
After
Yes.
10 years, we're
The answer
gonna,
is yes.
It's gonna be
Yes.
very
Or
different.
five.
very
I don't know if
different.
it's
Five, it'll be a
five.
whole different.
Yeah. So I'm trying to be as completely transparent about what I
Yeah.
do
Not
and
saying
don't
no.
know.
Right,
Yeah.
and I appreciate your
I didn't see it adjusting here. It's just that the agreement is for a 5-year term.
Right.
Yeah.
With a recurring 5-year, which it just wasn't addressed in.
It was in the meetings, it was a no, we would not have to put in any more money, but
Oh,
at the
okay.
meetings,
Didn't have the
which we
value
have
either.
meetings, but,
And I still think,
but not in the.
as we
Okay.
sit here today, I still think that may be
It could
the
be.
case, yeah. It's just a lot has changed.
Right.
But yeah,
And you learn things as you go.
Right.
Okay, so we're very over.
thank you.
Over, so we're gonna, thanks for coming.
Thanks for allowing us.
We may have
to
more
come.
questions,
We
we
hope
may
you
be
do.
asked, because
Look at-
our
shall I
partnership
send
is
you the
changing a little bit, so we want as informed the partners as possible.
I go back to that part of being a resident, and I want you to be as informed partners as
Well,
possible.
that was just, so one, this is really boring for you, but if you could, while we're following up on questions, so in the agreement, there's no specific, reference to the term, with the exception of it was initially for 5 years, it's a recurring 5 year.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
and I'm just under the assumption that the term starts when the village board approved it. But I
And
didn't,
signed it.
and signed it, right? Okay, so
Yeah.
there's nothing out there that,
So you're talking about
Which-
September 2017? So that's the
Yeah.
start date?
Start date, yeah.
okay, all right.
Even though.
Mhm.
Usually there's a term provision in this, so I was like, I just gotta ask.
And some of that relates to what the date would be for purposes of the TAP grant, because it was sort of triggered to.
Okay.
There's another document, Rebecca, it's the TAP grant, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was
And it was
more
intended
detailed.
to kind of run in unison to the TAP grant.
Okay.
Mhm. And yours was part of the TOSA second round and West Dallas, and you were all in that.
Mhm. So
That was the most
the,
detailed.
the former planning director was the one who had all the documentation.
Mhm.
Today found out successfully where it went within the scope of ours. It could be a transition in that, so I look forward to reviewing that other document.
And we'll make sure you get added to the email list.
Yeah, no, I just, you know me, I just like to know that all the staff.
We'll let you be. Thank
Were
you
they
all.
writing
Oh,
on it?
you sending it
much.
to Bart?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't capture that, I will do that.
Oh, no, if, I mean, I'm not, when you have a chance.
Oh, that's
All
super
right.
I'm always
easy.
like, looking at stuff like that.
I-
Yeah, that's super easy.
Did you guys agree not to meet on the next?
So your son too,
Yeah, we're
but
gonna
not
defer, we're
license.
gonna have to.
Oh,
No.
we have
I didn't know
that
that was
too.
right.
My kids have not even taken driver's ed, behind the wheel.
Yeah, we need 15-and-a-half-year-olds,
Big
it's getting his temps, I think.
Oh, we need more, I still got about 40 resumes or
Oh,
applications.
July.
Or,
So the twins turn 16 in 10 days, 9 days, whatever.
There's a couple
And
updates we
they,
can provide,
that
like,
means if you drive
shot
you know what,
Yeah.
we can pay for like as many Uber rides as they, or Lyft rides as they want.
Yeah, I've got, that's what I'm using.
Okay, that's
Can I
exactly.
tell you as well?
Thank you all.
And wait, Mom, this conversation we're having would never be happening.
And also,
have you heard? Just so that you don't have to.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, she sent the applications by
She
committee,
did send.
and they're
But-
marked, and-
Yes,
but it's,
but I did, that spreadsheet just make for me, it just made the
Oh,
work
it's,
easier.
oh, a lot.
Yeah.
Can you?
Sure, well, so, just a recap for Sarah, and if you wouldn't mind, if I could send her, well, you're still, oh,
We're in
yeah,
budget.
you're on a different,
Let's-
adjourn and
Let's
announce.
adjourn.
it.
adjourn fine, I moved to adjourn fine.
Second.
Okay, aye.
So on the memo that you were sent for purposes of tonight, there is a discrepancy. 3 of the committees that were under JP&L recommendation should have been moved to recommendation by village president and then confirmation by the board. And that is Planning Commission, Board of Appeals, Library Board. North Shore Fire Board is statutory, but you also have someone there by purposes of agreement. So we're gonna change that and we can correct that.
Okay.
Also wanted to clarify, there was a question that we fielded on the Parks Committee. Before, I think when you were reviewing it, there was only one new appointment. Someone who was to be reappointed did not want to get reappointed. And so that was the result in the 2.
Also, for design review, if Mary Wright gets put on bid for any reason, I confirmed with her that she would like to stay on both. And then for Wes's wife, April Toy, if she is appointed to, say, Board of Appeals or something that she was more interested in, I have not confirmed with her whether she'd stay on police, what is she, on rec? So there may be an opening. I just wanted to share with you that. And then Police Commission, Craig Bullock is on the list of bid appointments, and he's on Police Commission, so we need to clarify if he wants both. You know what I mean, like if he would stay on both, so I just wanted
Could we
to.
get a map, a list of who's current members on the committees and who's, I mean, last,
Yes.
we've had in the past terms, when they start, and who's coming off,
Yeah.
because,
Yeah, the clerk should be preparing that.
well,
I
it's
think
always
she,
used
I thought she said that, but I talked to her today. I'm assuming she's just in the room, that she said she was printing and bringing it.
Not bad.
I don't know if that's.
So last year, what Mike is talking about is last year, if you look at the file here, you'll see when I submitted the roster, it'll say, historical society, whatever, and then it would say, 2 people being reappointed, and you'd say the names, because they have to approve reappointments, and then the board does, and then under that, it would say, this person is being recommended for appointment, and it would say what slot they're filling, so you know whether it's a partial term, a full term, so the vacant slot of who's, you know, or if this person's moving to this committee, so it was very specific. I think we'll get there, but you want it ahead of time, right?
yeah, there used to be maintained an ongoing list of all the members in each committee and their terms and when they had,
That's no review desk.
Yeah, we can.
yeah, 'cause
I have
So then do we?
You have it?
I have it from our discussion, the 3 of us.
Yeah.
It's just, she should take it.
Yeah, we need to, I'd like to know who's coming off, because there was the point in your memo that we had this policy and we voted